I remember reading Joseph Smith's writings, like lectures on faith and the teachings of the prophet for the first time, and it was the most fascinating, intelligent stuff I'd ever read. I received a dream that night, which changed my perspective on everything, even more so now, the longer it's been, because things that I was shown in that dream, in that vision, were things that I could not have known on my own. I've always believed that there was like higher powers or something, right? I started having like dreams that would come true. The crime scene photos of this were like exactly what I saw in the dream. It was just like super disturbing for me.
Welcome in here on Zion Media. I am joined by a regular here on Zion Media, and you guys all know him as Latter day Chad. I call him LDC for short. And a lot of people have asked, who is he? Where did he come from? Did he come from the North Country? Is he without mother or father? Some might ask these questions because they've never actually heard his story. And he kind of came out of really nowhere. And he started an Instagram channel, I guess you would call it, or an Instagram page, posting some funny memes and doing some things as he got more integrated and active in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. But I want him to tell his backstory. I mean, I look at him kind of as a convert, and you'll kind of hear his story as to, I guess, his journey in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. But we're also going to get into a really cool dream that he had with one of the apostles who's not with us anymore. So we're going to deep dive on into who is this Latter-day Chad character? Where did he come from? And I'm excited for you to hear his story. So with that, LDC, tell us who you are.
Yeah, I mean, I've kind of made this point a lot of times, but I wouldn't be doing any of this stuff or be involved in any of this stuff if I hadn't had like some really weird crap happen to me, like supernatural stuff. And for me, like I've always like been someone who like I have dreams and stuff like that. And that's sort of part of where I came from is like I've always believed that there was like higher powers or something, right? Um, so especially when I was like, I want to say 15, 16 years old, thereabouts, that's when I started having like dreams that would come true. And it wasn't like all the time, but everyone gets downloads and stuff. And when I was about 16, this really started to like, uh, I guess, mess with my head a little bit and freak me out because at one point I actually had a dream where there was someone I knew from school. I didn't know them super well. They were like a friend of a friend. But in the dream, when I'm like having this experience, I keep having these other dreams. They're like little things coming true. And it's weirding me out. Um, I have this dream where this person dies. They die in a very specific way. And I wake up in the middle of the night, I have like a cold sweat. I'm freaking out. And I text one of my friends who knew that guy because I'm like convinced it's real. Like I have no idea what's going on, like a fever dream sort of thing. And he just like calms me down, like tells me to go back to sleep. But then 2 weeks later, um, the same person actually dies the exact way that they did in the dream. And I remember seeing like everyone was freaking out about it. And the crime scene photos of this were like exactly what I saw in the dream. It was just like super disturbing for me. So for my entire junior year of high school, because I was having these experiences and I didn't really know what was going on, I just like was homeschooled. I didn't even show up, right? Until my senior year. But even though I had a lot of these sort of experiences, because that's not the only one, that's just a really prominent one, I was someone who, because of like just like look around at like living in Utah, I never wanted to accept that God was real. I thought it was the stupidest thing ever. Like just the Utah culture is just it's just cringeworthy and it's cheesy, and I don't like it. Even to this day, I don't. And I make that point to be like, I've seen these things. I know that they are true, and I can't deny that. I'm not someone who's gonna lie, but I also sort of look at this stuff, and I don't necessarily like the way that people, I guess you could say, but to keep to go further, so, I go back to my senior year, and at the end of that, I'm sort of having these experiences again around 2020. I think a lot of people were back then, right? Um,
That seems like 2020 seems like there was an awakening that happened.
yeah, like, I think with COVID and the stuff going on there, it, like, made a lot of people, like, wake up and not really trust narratives that were going on. Like, for me, in the process, I had done, like, deep dives into did you know that they have CIA documents that talk about, like, astral projecting and communicating with spirits and talking about the veil between the spirit world and stuff and this is on the CIA website. You can look
Huh.
this stuff up if you're right now. Just Google CIA evil spirits or CIA uh, gateway project, and it will go to the official website. And I had dug through all that stuff. So at that point, I sort of I believed in like manifestation and that sort of stuff. I knew it was real. I had experienced it. Um, but I, again, like for the longest time, I really didn't want to like admit that, God was real or had anything to do with that. And it was actually Andrew Tate that got me to accept that.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So
So
Andrew Tate got you. This is funny. For those of you who don't know who Andrew Tate is, really, he kind of came out of nowhere. Um, and I actually heard about Andrew Tate because my son, in about 2021, was listening to a guy talk, and I thought, "Huh, I've never heard that guy's voice before." And he was saying some things that were somewhat intriguing about uh, being a man and taking ownership, and lots of things. And I'm like, "Oh yeah, I like." I mean, he says some things that I don't agree with as well, but I'm like, "Man, a lot of this stuff he's saying." So it was Andrew Tate that was a part of your, I guess,
yeah.
conversion.
So kinda. So to backtrack a little bit, around like 2021, 2022, I was the only thing I did for those 2 years. I mean, most people on here wouldn't know this, but I'm into like martial arts and kickboxing and that sort of thing. That's what I'm into, and that's kinda why I got into Andrew Tate because he's a professional kickboxer, and that's the sort of training I was doing. But at that point in my life, I was pretty much just doing that 24/7. I was in I would say, a very dark and angry place where I just hated everybody, honestly. And this is one experience where, again, to sort of emphasize the point, I remember there was this sort of experience where I was in a very dark place. I was just laying there and I was just angry all the time. Um, and in my mind's eye, I saw this sort of vision of Christ. And it took away the pain that was inside me. And immediately afterwards, I was like, that is the stupidest thing ever. Right? Like, no way. Um, and it wasn't, but at the same time, I'm researching these things on like the CIA website. And I do believe that there are spiritual things going on in the world, that there are like conspiracy theories. That's true.
The sneeze. That's
That's
true.
truth. There are conspiracy theories. Um, what the Book of Mormon would call secret combinations. Like, holy crap, there is people who believe in all this occult stuff and it's legit. And there's people in the government who believe in this stuff. And I'm researching it. And comes this Andrew Tate guy that I start listening to. And nobody cares who he is at first. Nobody. Like, they might call him like, oh, he's this or that or what, but nobody cares until he starts going on about like, listen, Andrew Tate, this is his words. He starts talking about how I used to be an atheist. I used to think religion was the dumbest thing ever. But as he became a millionaire, and now he's like a billionaire, he would be invited to like these secret parties that were essentially run by Satanists. He was essentially invited to partake in what we would call secret combinations, where people do ritualistic things to worship the devil and to communicate through the veil with, spirits. And he saw that stuff happen, and he was invited to essentially make deals for fame and for power. And he turned it down. And as soon as he starts speaking out about this and saying, listen, I know there's a God because I have seen
Yeah,
that the devil is real. Yeah, like
so
he
if the
knows that.
devil's real, then God has to be real.
Exactly. That's what Andrew Tate was essentially saying. Um, and he's like saying, I'm going to be a Muslim because that is the only religion that has any self-respect. And there's truth to that. Like that resonated with me because just, I'm sorry, but
Yeah, Muslims,
Christi-
it's a high demand religion, and I would say Mormonism is also, if you really look at it and really follow it, is also a high demand religion where you're expected to live, a certain way. Muslims are, you know, pretty serious about their faith and their religion.
I would say that Christianity in general doesn't, like, including our church, not just like in general, Christianity, LDS members included, don't really take the things Christ taught seriously. And they do one of two things. They become very dogmatic, and all they care about is their beliefs and their creeds being right, but they don't care about anyone's salvation or helping anyone. And on the other end, you've just got these sort of whiny, pushover Christians where they think the only thing Jesus taught was, oh, love everyone and be nice. And when you actually read the scriptures, you're like, this is not what I was expecting.
I think Jesus said one time, I didn't come to bring peace, but a sword.
Yeah,
I don't know. I thought he said that. So,
he did.
yeah, yeah. So, and he talks about vengeance, and so, yeah, the teddy bear Jesus has definitely infiltrated. Satan's done a masterful job with the Christians. So I can see why Andrew Tate would kind of
Yeah.
go there and feel that way.
Yeah. And for me, like actually understanding this stuff. So in my, I sort of eventually came to a point where I was like, Andrew Tate's right. Because the things he was telling me were actually helping me in my life. And I could see, okay, there's actually supernatural stuff that's happened. I've witnessed things that can't be impossible. I mean, there's little things where it's like, there was a time where multiple times actually, where it's like, I was laying in bed and I have a thought come into my head and it's like, this person is about to text me this specific thing. And then my phone vibrates. It's the person I was expecting and they say the exact thing, right? Like I see the text message in my mind before it comes. And at the time, I didn't understand like the Holy Spirit or the Holy Ghost, which are two different things, by the way. I didn't understand that when I would be getting these downloads through the years, my body getting hot, that was the baptism of fire that the Book of Mormon talks about. Because for me, I didn't see myself. It's like I had my own morals that I stuck to, but I was always someone who just sort of, hated being told what to do by anyone. I just did whatever I wanted. So it took humility for me to like even admit that there was a God. And I just decided to look at all the different religions, um, looking at like, for example, going through prophecies about Jesus Christ and seeing that in the Old Testament, it talks about how God says the Jews will look at his body that they pierced in Zechariah 12:10. It's like, oh, well, that's really obvious. Um, but at this point, like, I kept getting downloads that would lead me to believe the Book of Mormon was true. And I kept rejecting them because I thought it was the stupidest thing ever, right? Because the Book of Mormon, it explicitly warns about secret combinations. I am so surprised when I hear people like saying, like, oh, I read the Book of Mormon and it made me feel so warm inside or whatever, right? Um, and they basically don't even acknowledge all the horrific things that happen in the Book of Mormon and how Moroni literally breaks the fourth wall, turns to the reader of the Book of Mormon and says, "This is a warning for you people," right? Um, it's sort of that all is well in Zion mentality that people aren't actually paying attention to the Book of Mormon and they're just complacent, and the people don't really reflect the teachings of that. Um, so But at the same time, as I'm reading into conspiracies, I come upon like the Hopewell Indian stuff, where it's like there were massive population centers across the United States, and Tucker Carlson was talking about they had buildings, they had cities, they had all these artifacts and stuff. And I'm seeing these conspiracy theorists on TikTok talking about how they think that America is actually the old world of the Bible because they found Hebrew artifacts and that the museums always try and cover it up. I'm like, no way. No way. Because, like, with my mindset, with what I know, it's like that's obviously like pointing towards the Book of Mormon type thing. So I keep denying that and resisting that. Um, and I have a lot of these experiences where it's like, I have a dream about this Book of Mormon I was given when I was like 8 years old and had my name written in a certain way. I'd never read it, never opened it. I have a dream, and then the night after I wake up, that Book of Mormon was on my table and I didn't put it there. I hadn't seen it in years. Um, and eventually, as I'm like questioning this stuff and trying to figure out what's going on, because I really don't want to admit that, I'm led to this video by Glenn Beck, where he is talking about an experience he had, a dream that he believed was a vision from God. And he's essentially describing what I would call secret combinations. I think the video is called like, "Was Glenn's dream a vision of our future?" or something like that. But he's basically describing that in his life, he wasn't able to have dreams because of a disorder he had at the time. And he isn't having any dreams. And he has one dream in that 10-year time period. And it's this warning that's basically about, Book of Mormon secret combination type stuff. And it just deeply disturbs him. And then he goes back to having no dreams again. And then he gets a call from someone he describes as a religious leader. He doesn't mention a name. And that person wants to meet with him. So I see this, and he goes to see that leader. And the night before he sees that leader, that religious leader, he has the same exact dream again. And when he goes to meet with this man, the only thing that that man, who's unnamed, says to him is essentially, God communicates to us through dreams and visions sometimes, right? He's like, yeah. He's like, and the guy basically says, that dream you had, don't forget it.
That night, I have the exact same dream. And I wake up and I'm just in a panic. And we get in the car. I don't tell my wife. We get in the car and she said, "This is going to be nice." And I said, "Yeah, except I'm having a hard time breathing right now." And she said, "Why?" And I said, "Because I had that dream again last night." Remember, 10 years, no dreams, 2 dreams, the same one, and then the same one about a year and a half later. And she said, "You should talk to him about that." And I said, no. If the Lord wants me to delve into it, he'll bring it up. No, I don't want to talk about it. And so we go into the guy's house. We sit down. He's sitting on a couch, and he sits down. He sits right on the edge of the couch, and he leans into me, and he says, "Sometimes the Lord talks to people." I said, "Uh-huh." And he said, "And sometimes people like you, he'll speak in many different ways." "Uh-huh. Including dreams or visions." And I said, "Right." And he said, and this is when he leaned in, "And you know exactly what I'm talking about." And I said, "Uh-huh." And he said, "Do not dismiss that dream. Do not ever dismiss that."
And for me, my biggest hangup, honestly, was I was like sold, like, okay, there was probably pre-Columbus contact with the New World, and for whatever reason, they're covering that up. The Book of Mormon could be real, but I did not base see the church as something that was receiving revelation. I didn't. I did not believe it. I was like, okay, well, maybe Joseph Smith was a fallen prophet. Maybe he was getting real revelation. Maybe he messed up with the polygamy stuff. And then who knows what happened? I don't know. But I did not believe, especially with the whole COVID thing. Like, so many people were so upset over the church backing the COVID vaccine, which now, if you go to the official government website for it, they say, yeah, actually, it was created in a laboratory in China and it was released and it was all conspiracy. Like, they say that on the official government website now, right? So that sort of thing put a lot of distrust where it's like, I am seeing these sort of global conspiracy things happening that Andrew Tate's talking about. And I'm like, if this church was actually led by Jesus Christ, they would know about that. Um, so
And so you weren't
I
like active in the church. You weren't like
no,
involved in the church. You had nothing really to do.
not at all.
But
Like,
you were aware of it. You were aware of the Book of Mormon. You were aware of
yeah,
Joseph Smith, and you were just
yeah,
kind of
like,
working all these things through your mind.
yeah, like I knew enough about it. I was baptized when I was like 8, but I never went to church. I thought it was the most boring, stupid thing ever, right? I'm so into like the deep doctrine stuff now because it's interesting. It's true. It's like describing how reality works. I remember reading Joseph Smith's writings, like lectures on faith and the teachings of the prophet for the first time, and it was the most fascinating, intelligent stuff I'd ever read. Like not what you're getting in Sunday school whatsoever. Um, but I, but because of the fact that we have, this sort of what you would call Utah culture, right? And the type of people, and then just seeing like, okay, I didn't think the church was getting revelation, but I'm trying to figure out what's true. And I see this Glenn Beck video. I'm like, I know Glenn Beck is Mormon. I know he is. Could it have been a leader of the church he talked to? Right. So I prayed. I asked to know. I was like, okay, you need to show me. And I received a dream that night, which changed my perspective on everything, even more so now, the longer it's been, because things that I was shown in that dream, in that vision, were things that I could not have known on my own. Because I'd barely read parts of the Bible and some of the Book of Mormon. I didn't know any of this stuff, but I prayed about it. And so, because the prayer was about this struggle with accepting these things. And in the dream, I saw sort of like a big mountain or a tower, and there was like a fog around it. And on top of it were like people in the church, and there were leaders of the church, and there were bishops, and there were all sorts of people on this tower. And I'm making my way up this tower. I'm journeying up it because I'm like trying to warn these people about this secret combination stuff, if you'll call it that. That's essentially what I was doing. That's not the words I think I used in the dream, but I'm making my way up, and when I get to the top, to the people up there, and this is a part of the story I normally don't tell. I normally when I'm telling this story, it's because there's people arguing, and there's groups of people like, oh, the church is in apostasy because it hasn't gotten new revelation in 200 years. And I'm saying, well, I had this experience that lets me know this is true. So I don't normally bring up this part. But I now recognize what I was shown was the prophecies of Isaiah. And that's why I'm so into this Davidic servant stuff, because I was shown it. So I see the people on this tower, and I'm trying to warn them. I guess you could call them watchmen on a tower. I would now after reading Isaiah. But these people, they're drinking alcohol, and they're smoking. They're smoking cigarettes, and they're drunk. And while the world is watching them, they're just, smiling and acting like, ooh, like all nice. But behind the scenes, they are just drunk, and they're only putting on a show for the world, right? These people are having the outward appearance of being religious. But when I am trying to warn them, like, no, there is some actual stuff going on that you should know about, they turn a blind eye. They are drunk. And so the first time I read Isaiah 28, talking about the drunkards of Ephraim, I visibly gasped. I was like, holy crap. And in the midst of this, I'm trying to warn these people. I see a group of people off to the side. Um, and the clothing they were wearing, it looked like the clothing when you go through a temple endowment, like, or a temple wedding, like the white suits, white shoes. And I don't remember all the people, but I know there were apostles there. Um, some of them living, some of them not. And from among them came a man who I recognized as an apostle who had previously died, who was no longer alive. But the way he looked didn't look the way he did when um I first when I last saw him, I should say, because he was an old man when I last saw him, and his hair now, it was more like it was like a dark gray with like white on it instead of like just like an old man's hair. He looked younger, I should say. Not like young, but he looked younger. More so when he was like in his prime. And he was wearing this white suit. It was kind of glowing, like he had a light around him. And then this man, he comes to me and he tells me what I'm seeing. He tells me that, certain specific instructions for me, for my life, and what I need to do. He essentially, the best thing I can say is he reassures me God is in charge of the church, but there's a lot of issues that it has.
Thank you for tuning in to today's episode and supporting Zion Media. Listen, this episode is brought to you by Oraqel Code. Now, if you don't know what your Oraqel Code is, it's really easy. Scan the QR code and sign up to get your Oraqel Code today. You get your spiritual Oraqel Code and your temporal Oraqel Code, and all we need is your birthday. It also comes with a personalized song that talks about you, who you are, and your spiritual gifts based on that Oraqel Code and just a little bit of information. So fill it out. It's only 99 bucks. And trust me, it'll be some of the best $99 you've ever spent. Many have called this their patriarchal song. So if you're looking for your patriarchal song, go get your Oraqel Code and your Oraqel song today.
And this is why I don't like to say this to people because I'm trying to like build up their faith and help them believe these things. Because I literally in this vision have an apostle after I prayed, and it gets crazier. So he gives me this warning, and then he also tells me other things that I have since found to be true. He tells me things about myself, um, who I am, what my role is. And then at the end of it, he gives me a warning about Satan, which is involved in what he's telling me about myself, like telling me how I knew him in the premortal life, essentially. And he basically tells me, like, trust me, you know him better than you think, and he's not what you're expecting. And as he sees this, I see this image of a man who has long, sandy blonde hair, like to his shoulders. And it's like he didn't have any clothing on. Not that I like saw anything inappropriate. He like had sort of like a fog around him, but he didn't have clothing on. And he was like, and his form seemed to shift. Like he almost looked androgynous, where it's like he would look more feminine at times and more masculine, but he always had that long blonde hair. And as this apostle was about to tell me something else and give me some sort of instructions, this man with the long blonde hair, basically think of like a jump scare in like a video game or in a horror movie, jumps out and I wake up. And it gets crazier because every single person I've talked to who has claimed that they've seen Lucifer, I have about 5 people now that I've talked to. One of these stories was actually from a member of the 70, from what I understand. So I had a bishop and a member of the 70 about this. They described the same man with the long blonde hair. And I later find out Joseph Smith talks about an angel with sandy blonde hair and how you shouldn't trust him. But it does get crazier because about a year later, when I actually start my Instagram page, I don't know why I'm doing it. I make this page because the Lord tells me, you need to make this page. I'm like, why? I don't know.
Did he
Like,
tell
so
did he tell you why? And can you tell us who the apostle was in your dream?
I can't because I was told not to, but you
Was was
the first time we talked, you knew exactly who it was. I told you about this dream, I told you about this experience the first time you and I talked, and you gave me the name right away. The spirit told you that.
right.
Um, but I was told, so it turns out the apostle who came to my in my dream, I find out, is the man who met with Glenn Beck. So when I start
And
my
I don't think
page,
Glenn Beck's ever said out loud who he, uh
no, he hasn't publicly. Um,
and when I heard Glenn Beck's story, the spirit bore witness to me who that was as well. I don't know why, it just like, boom, here it is in your brain, here you go.
yeah. And so I found out because when I started my page on Instagram, I was told you need to start your page because there's going to be other people who you will need to meet, and that's how you're going to do it. And I was like, I was like,
That signal, right? I mean, would have you ever found Zion Media if you weren't involved in your own page, or would we have ever found you? Probably not.
yeah, exactly. So, and this was like end of 2023, and there's this young man who's a teenager who keeps texting me and asking me questions because I seem to know the scriptures pretty well. I have like a photographic memory. So I'm just boom, boom. I haven't studied this stuff for years, but I just can understand it. And I come to find out he is a family friend of Glenn Beck's and that he actually dated Glenn Beck's daughter. Um, and like some people who watch this video might even know who he is because he like has his own TikTok where he does stuff now or something. I'm not sure. But after I find this out, I send him that video and I start asking about it because I had this impression for the longest time that it was that apostle who appeared to me in that dream that I that was the one who said this stuff. That's what the spirit was telling me. And he basically does the thing on Instagram where you slide up so you can't see the messages. And he basically makes me promise like, listen, the church didn't want this information, or I don't know if it was the church or like Glenn Beck's family. Someone didn't want this information to be public, which is why the person's name wasn't known. But he knows that story. His grandpa is good friends with Glenn Beck, and he knows that story. And the person who appeared to me in my dream, after I prayed about that, is in fact the apostle that talked to Glenn Beck.
Wow.
Right. And again, first time I'm talking to Shane on FaceTime, I tell him the story to ask what he thinks of it. After I saw him on the Conversion to Christ podcast, I'm like, I've got to talk to this guy. And he immediately knows the name of the person. It's like, he asks, is it this person? I'm like, yeah, that's who it is. So that experience for me, I see, and after I start learning about Isaiah, I was shown these prophecies from Isaiah happening. And I was basically told the church is true, and it's guided by God, but it's not perfect. And that's why these issues that you see are true, but it's still the true church. You know, the truest, I should say, because there will never be a fullness of truth in the telestial kingdom. There won't.
So I look at I like how Joseph Smith called the Book of Mormon the most correct.
Yes.
And I often say, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is like unto the Book of Mormon, the most correct. That doesn't mean that we got everything right. That doesn't mean that we have all the truth. And we need to understand something, that the fullness of the gospel and the everlasting gospel, those are two different things. And so Joseph Smith restored the fullness of the gospel. The everlasting gospel, that's the ongoing restoration that I'm pretty confident is underway. And that's what Russell M. Nelson's talking about. Hey, if you think the church has been fully restored, eat your vitamins. Like he knows. He knows there's the everlasting gospel is coming to the earth. And so yeah, so you're kind of, it was cool when LDC reached out to me. I didn't have Zion Media. I had gone on some podcasts, and it was cool to see his fire for a guy that didn't necessarily get baptized by water. He was being baptized by fire when I met him. And man, it was text and text and text. What about this? What about this? What about this? So many questions, so curious. And I think you hadn't even been through the temple when we first met, right?
No, I had, um,
You
and
had received
actually,
your patriarchal blessing.
yeah, I had. And it's interesting. Again, like I wanted
Will you
my patriarchal
will
blessing.
you share the story of the bishop that you've shared with me, or are you gonna keep that to
Yeah.
yourself?
So this was one of the people that confirmed to me that the Lucifer I saw was the same person. So, I'm in Florida doing solar stuff, beginning of 2024. And I go to this ward and I just like, okay, I'm gonna go up and bear my testimony. And what I'm doing is like, I'm not like giving some, oh, generic thing. I'm like, no, like listing all these crazy things. And the people there are just like, what? Their mouths wide open. What is he talking about? So this
So
bishop,
it wasn't like one of the just the, "I know that you're," yeah,
yeah,
it wasn't one
yeah,
of those, okay.
yeah, I was talking about
Nothing wrong with
specific.
those, but it was a different, probably a different testimony. Did you have your glasses on or no?
I didn't yet. No.
Did you have a pop
So
collar?
probably, yeah.
Okay.
So after I bear my testimony and do this stuff, this bishop's wife, she invites me over for dinner, and she basically tells me like that they have some kids uh, who are, they're good people, but they aren't really necessarily the biggest fans of the church, and maybe I could help them understand some stuff. Um, so I'm like, okay. So, and I talked to her and her husband a little bit, and I'm texting them. They invite me over to this dinner, and then when they get there, they're like, okay, listen, we didn't actually need you to teach our kids. We wanted to talk to you because there's not a lot of people who can actually understand the deeper things. And I'm there for 8 hours talking to these guys. And again, like, I'm not going to tell the stories specifically what they told or who they are, but they're telling me stuff about like some stuff that I knew, some stuff I didn't about like the second comforter, um, teaching me like some stuff I need to pay attention to when I go through the temple, um, teaching me about angelic visitations and evil spirits and things that they had witnessed. And um, his his wife basically told me like, when I saw you up there, the spirit told me that we needed to talk to you and to tell you these things so that you can be prepared for the days ahead, right? Because like I think God right now, he wants anyone who's willing to, receive the baptism of fire, the baptism of the Holy Ghost, to be sanctified and receive the actual endowment of power, not the symbolic one that happens when you go through the temple. I think they want anyone who's willing to do it. And this was like 8 hours of talking. And it was shortly after this that actually, it was a week after this that I actually get the Melchizedek priesthood. So I get the Melchizedek priesthood, and the day after I get the Melchizedek priesthood, so for solar, we were at an Airbnb, and there weren't enough rooms. So I was like sleeping on the couch. And this girl I know, she was in this one room and then she left. So I took that room. So I didn't have to sleep on the couch anymore. But what happens, I didn't know, for reference, this happened to her too, but it happens to me once I go in the room. So I go into that room and I wake up in the morning and my body is completely frozen. This is the day after I've received the Melchizedek priesthood. And I see this shadow figure in my room. And I don't know what's going on. I hear like breathing, almost like a dog panting. Like I see this shadow figure and it goes from one end of my room to the other. And then I feel it behind me. I feel the breathing on my neck. Like
No way.
I can feel the breath on my neck. And I was so confused. I was like, did someone bring a dog here? What's going on? But I can't move. And I couldn't move until I literally called upon the name of Jesus Christ. And then I able to move. It's done. This happens 3 days in a row, right? And I call up that girl who she's like off with her boyfriend or something. I'm like, asking like, hey, did you notice anything weird when you were in that room? And I noticed this earlier too, but she was sleeping with her door wide open. And me and her, we're friends now. At the time, me and her, we didn't get along very well. And she was always very nitpicky and yelling at me and stuff. So if I'm sleeping out there in the living room, there's no way this chick is just leaving her door wide open and sleeping with the light on. That would be weird. But she's doing that every night. And she's like, yeah, I tried to tell everyone, but no one would listen to me. They said it was just like a mouse in there, but there was something that was in the room and it was from exactly where like it was behind me, same direction in the room. So I call up that bishop. He tells me what to do now that I have the priesthood and how to dedicate the house with oil and cast out an evil spirit. And after that, there's no more issues. It was actually a duplex Airbnb. So I go to the neighbor next door and ask them, and they talked about how even when there's no one there, they could hear voices and stuff in the walls. So day after I get Melchizedek priesthood, this thing attacks me after I meet this bishop who's like telling me this further light and knowledge type stuff. And it's like with the first vision, it's like, or the book of Moses, when you get further light and knowledge, you get a spiritual attack right afterwards. It's the craziest thing. But uh that is that story of how that happened. And then that sort of leads to me being here because realistically, like I said, like I don't like any of the weird, annoying Mormon stuff. I know this stuff is legit. There's other stuff that I've witnessed that I'm not going to say on here because anytime you bring up any sort of spiritual experience, the members of the church attack you. They do. Um, in fact, or even if they don't attack you, they'll be like, "Oh, well, I'm sure you saw something." Like back in February, I had a crazy spiritual experience, which I'm not going to get into the details on here about what happened to me. But I immediately, after this happened, called someone up that I knew to be like, you'll never believe what just happened to me. This just happened to me. And you know what the person says to me? Well, I'm sure you saw something. I'm like, no, this literally happened to me. And growing up, when I was having these dreams of the future, that's exactly what would happen to me. Is I would try to explain to a family member or someone that I was having these experiences, and the people just automatically reject that, right? If you claim that you're having a spiritual experience, they either don't believe you and they think you're an idiot or don't listen, or they accuse you of being like Chad Daybell or something, right?
Right.
I'm gonna I'm gonna say this. You people who reject spiritual experiences, who reject further light knowledge, you create the Chad Daybells. Because guess what? You force anyone who wants to experience spiritual things, who wants to receive further light and knowledge, which the temple is teaching us to do, you force them to go out in some obscurity and then they join some cult or something because you can't handle the spiritual things. In fact, the reason why I wanted to get a hold of Shane was because I didn't have anyone who I could talk these spiritual experiences about. And I see him on the Conversion to Christ podcast. I see him telling about some experiences that he had in prison. And immediately the spirit tells me, that's true. You should listen to this guy. I'm like, okay. And I tried getting a hold of him for weeks. I'm actually the one who told David Douglas, you should be friends with that guy. I saw him on this podcast. I want to talk to him about this. And when I read the comments on these videos, you weren't saying anything controversial. You were saying, I know the church is true. I had these experiences. They changed my life forever. And everybody in the comments,
Oh man, I
what are
got
they saying?
attacked. I
Oh
just
yeah,
got well, why do you think I started my own podcast? Because I'm like, clearly going on other people's podcasts and talking about this, I either get attacked or they'll just shut it down. I mean, I went on a couple podcasts just as a guest telling my story. Nothing more than what I have talked about here on Zion Media, and literally, uh, they canceled me.
yeah,
So yeah, I mean, it is we have created a bit of a challenge here as and people will have these spiritual experiences and this isn't me saying that people are going to have it. I'm just telling you what Joel 2:28 says. It says that people are going to have says that people like LDC are going to have dreams and visions and visitations and all of those things. And literally the temple teaches us if we're to be like Adam, then we should be at our own personal altar with our spouse waiting for messengers to give us further light and knowledge. And we should be praying for that. We should be asking for that. We should be expecting that to happen. And when it does happen, we need to be wise and hold space for people that are having these experiences. Listen to them, and just hold space for them. And you don't have to necessarily, like, if they're trying to get you to follow some cult or leave the church or do weird stuff, clearly you shouldn't do that. But if they're like, man, I had this dream or I had this visitation or whatever, you should hold space for that. And you should do as Paul says, believe all things, hope for all
I'm gonna
things.
I'm gonna say this much. Um, I think that people really they don't understand the temple, for one. They don't understand that the temple is saying, if you follow these things in the temple, you may be called forth to be a king and a priest in heaven. Until then, you are only anointed to become such. They don't
Right.
understand that. Um, I don't think people like immediately the first thing after I went through the temple was, this is teaching me how to receive angels and visions and receive further light and knowledge. And I'm also going to say this, every single person I have met, myself included, that can receive revelation and get true revelation receives false revelation too. Joseph Smith openly talked multiple times in Doctrine and Covenants about times he received false revelation, and he is one of the 7 archangels. He is one of the 7 dispensation heads, and he received false revelation. And there's a whole D&C passage where it talks about how there's 3 types of revelations: revelations of man, revelations of God, and revelations of the devil, and that you need to discern them. And the more open people are to receiving revelation, the more easily it is, the more that they'll get weird stuff mixed in that makes no sense. So
Well,
that's why.
we know in the temple we get a blessing in the initiatory that blesses us to be able to discern
Yeah,
truth and error. So we know when you open yourself up to it all. And this is what happens to people, and not to call anybody out, but there's a lot of people who started receiving, they wrote anonymous books and they had some good information.
I'd say
And
I have those
then,
anonymous books.
yeah, me too. And it's good. They started receiving, and then they thought, "Oh, I must be the next prophet, or I must be the next whatever it is." And then they started creating their own following and their own organization. And so you can, just because you got to be careful with this stuff too, and you should be, and you should. And LDC, I know you go through this all the time. You're so open, and you're receiving so much stuff, and you're oftentimes like coming to me like, hey, I have to work through and make sure that I don't let my ego get in the way, or I got to make
Oh, yeah.
sure that I don't, that I'm discerning. Am I receiving? Where am I getting this revelation from? Uh, because I mean, once you open up the windows of heaven, you also open up the windows of hell. And how do I know that? Well, Joseph Smith again is a great example of that. He goes to the grove to open the heavens, and what happened? The gates of hell are open there too, and he has to overcome hell to get to heaven. And for me, it's opposite. I'll get light, and then it's afterwards that the darkness or the false revelation might creep in, and you've just got to kind of work through that.
I usually like it's different at times for me. I'll get like a lot of times where it's like it's in a really dark place. And then when I overcome it, I get just like this high where I'm just getting all this information. People are like, how did you know that? Where it's like I know things about people and they don't know how I know it. And that's I think part of it where it's like that rough part sometimes can be like the sanctifying of the baptism of
Right.
fire. And then when you overcome it, you get that further light and knowledge. And it happens in different degrees. But truthfully, Joseph Smith taught, and the reason I wanted to make this point is like, I'm going to have my own opinions about Revelation, and so are a lot of people, but the attitudes of the members of the church are a lot of them are what Joseph Smith described as being like Methodists. There's a quote by Joseph Smith where he's like, it doesn't matter if somebody errs in their doctrine or their theology a little bit, as long as their hearts are set on Christ. And I think that's what Jesus Christ meant when he said, their creeds are an abomination. In my opinion, what I believe is a little bit closer to the traditional Trinity than what most LVS members believe. I believe there's more of a oneness than people would like to admit. I don't believe in the Trinity in the way they would describe it, but I have my own opinion. I think that the more modern mainstream opinion is very influenced by the sort of Brigham Young God doctrine, which I don't adhere to. But I don't think Brigham Young is in hell for teaching that Adam was literally God the Father and that, Jesus was created in let's say, a very organic way between Michael, God, and Mary. That's stuff that's in the Journal of Discourses right there, right? And I think it's weird. And a lot of apostles argued with Brigham Young over this. Orson Pratt famously stood against the Adam God doctrine and said, no, that is false. But I also think there may be truth to it. Maybe, Michael gave up an exalted state to come down and start the human family. He was an exalted person and he went to a new planet, and that's how the humans on that planet got
And
started.
that's highly likely, and we do call him Father Adam. So in that regard, is he a father? Yes, he's a father. And so he was probably getting some truth and just not being able to decipher exactly what that means. And so you get this truth with some error. Certainly we can say that uh, Adam is a father to us all. We can say that, and we call him Father Adam. And so it just gets confusing. And does Adam have a father? He sure does. And does his father have a father? Well, according to the book of Revelation, he sure does. And we've talked about
Yeah.
this on the Rob Workup podcast. And I would say even in the Rob Workup podcast, these doctrines are still being kind of fleshed out. And until we get the sealed portion, or until we get further light and knowledge, these right now stand as possibly theories that have some truth to them, but I wouldn't call them the doctrine yet until we get that further light and knowledge.
Yeah. And I would say, listen, there are a lot of people. The reason this brings this up, because it is something important. I want to make a whole presentation about how members are the reason we don't have the sealed portion. There are quotes by people like John Taylor saying, we have to build Zion or else the second coming won't come. Well, we haven't built Zion yet.
Right.
Right. There are quotes in the Doctrine and Covenants that say, and President Nelson and other apostles, Ezra Taft Benson most famously, have talked about how the church is under condemnation until it is. And I think based on the things Jeffrey R. Holland is saying, that condemnation is being lifted as more and more people awaken and rise up.
We're going to do an episode about Elder Holland and really look at the body of work since 2023. He has been posting regularly on Instagram and Facebook. And if you haven't been paying attention, he's been, I think, dropping some interesting clues, focused on some interesting, he's funny how he does it. He's like, I just stumbled upon 3rd Nephi 22.
It says that there's more scriptures that will come forth. Interesting.
Right.
I bet there's more good things come. Or he's quoted Isaiah. I forget which Isaiah it is, but it's 3rd Nephi 22 twice. First of these weird posts he does, it's Isaiah. And he's talking about when the Lord speaks, you should listen. And more scriptures coming forth. And you want to know what else? Here's one that really stood out. In one of them, he makes a joke where it's like, good morning to all you followers, to all 3 of you who are listening. And I heard that, I'm like, he's saying that nobody's actually listening to this and they just think it's like some... But I definitely...
We are living in a cool time. So to bring it back around, you end up having that experience. You get your patriarchal blessing, and then you decide you want to go take out your endowment. or receive your endowment, and you do that,
Yeah.
and
And I had
then
some I had some crazy stuff that happened with my endowment that you know about as well that like I'm not really gonna talk about here because but the main point I was trying to sort of hone in on, the reason I brought that up. So there was a time when in one of these group chats that people add me to on Instagram, like with theology stuff, where people who are like active members of the LDS Church were arguing with people who think that the because of this condemnation or not receiving revelation for a while, at least not public revelation, I should say, because I believe individuals like Elder Holland, I believe Elder Holland is certainly receiving revelation, but we haven't gotten like a new doctrine and covenants or new scriptures. We haven't had a thus saith the Lord since Joseph F. Smith. And they're arguing over this. And I come in on the side of the people who are saying the church is not in apostasy, saying, I had this experience and I've prayed about this. I truly have. And I've asked other people's opinions. And I truly believe the spirit of that apostle came and visited me because I prayed, that he was sent to me. And that's why I received that vision. And I tell that experience that I literally had a vision where I was visited by the spirit of this apostle. And so I know the church is true. And that despite these flaws, you want to know what the people who I was defending, how they reacted? You want to know? Oh, you can't say that you had revelation. You're not the prophet. I'm defending them. But these people, it scares them. They need that security. They need to believe that everything is meticulously placed and that the church, I think their church is getting revelation on stuff and that they're doing their best. But I also think weird stuff like Adam God doctrine comes up sometimes, right? It's not perfect. But I'm out here saying I've had this personal revelation that I cannot deny to try and bring these people who they're arguing with over to our side. That's what I'm doing. I'm reaching to these people who are upset that the church is not encouraging people as much to receive revelation. I think it is more so now, but that's their viewpoint that we're not allowed to seek revelation anymore. The church isn't receiving revelation. It's
right,
all terrible.
and that's contrary to everything that, the leadership is saying. They're saying, "Seek for dreams, seek for visions, seek for
Yes.
revelation." I mean, that's what I'm hearing them say, so we must be hearing 2 different things. Okay, to wrap up, we're coming up on an hour here, and
That's
we're ready
right.
to jump. I'm being a guest on a podcast, here in about, 7 minutes. So to kind of wrap up,
Well, I guess to
LDC.
finish that thought,
Yeah.
the point is, I was the one there saying, I've had this personal witness that these things are true. And it was the members who, in this argument, I was on their side that are coming out against it. And I think that reflects a lot of the people. Because even though I was arguing against those people and other people and disagreeing with them, the ones who thought the church was an apostasy, guess what? They actually respected the fact that I claimed to have this revelation. We could actually come to an understanding. But the people who were supposed to be on my side, they weren't. So what does that tell you?
Well, it tells me that we've gotta do a better job as Ephraim, as Latter-day Saints, allowing and holding space for people that are having spiritual experiences because they're seeking for them. I think there's a scripture that says, "Ask and ye shall receive, knock and it shall be opened unto you." It doesn't say only if you're the prophet or the apostles or a general authority or a mission president or a stake president or a bishop. It says anybody who asks can receive if you ask in faith. And so we've got to hold space for people that are having these spiritual experiences because it's only going to ramp up. And people are going to have more and more of these experiences. So if you are a parent and you have a child that's having these experiences, listen to them, be there for them, comfort them, uh, seek to understand what they're going through. They're coming to you because you're their parent, and you should say, "Okay, let's let's work through this. Help me understand." And the parent ought to help this child of theirs discern truth and error. Like, "Hey, I know you're getting this, but that might not be true. But hey, this over here, that might be true." That's what a parent should do. So I hope that we will do that. Grateful to have LDC as I've kind of adopted him as my son. In fact, while we were sitting here, I heard his laundry go off. So just so you know, LDC, you're gonna have to come over here and we'll get the laundry at my house. But it's really cool. He's helped my wife walk the dogs. And he is like an adopted son to me, and so I'm grateful to have a little LDC in my life and here on Zion Media. We are living in some incredible times where the Spirit of the Lord is here on the earth in a way that I can't even begin to describe to you. And we need to be aware, and we need to be, I guess, seeking, searching, asking for revelation. And I promise you, if you'll do that, you'll receive it. There is an awakening and a fire that is here. And I think that that fire that's here is happening amongst the Latter-day Saints that have broken hearts and contrite spirits. And listen, it's happening for people who aren't Latter-day Saints. I had a young man, Parker, who has nothing to do with the LDS Church, and somehow he caught the Hidden Ones podcast. He saw this guy in a mask, started watching it, and then started watching all of our stuff, and started experiencing baptism of fire type things, helped him understand some things that had happened to him. So our reach here at Zion Media is Zion. Zion isn't a church. Zion is a people, and a church is a very telestial type of thing. Zion is a terrestrial type of thing, and I understand that the need for church and for community because they help us get to that Zion or city of Zion. So, anyways, LDC, thanks for coming on, my man. Thanks for sharing your experience. If you liked this video, go ahead, smash that like button. Share this video. And if you don't follow Latter Day Chad on Instagram, you should. He's involved in a project right now here with Zion Media where we are doing 100 songs in 100 days. If you haven't checked out those songs, you can go to the shorts and listen to the songs. Or, hey, you can go to Apple Music or Spotify. All you got to search for is Zion Bros. And you can find all of our music on Apple Music and Spotify. And oh, really cool news. You're going to be able to have and find all of our podcasts on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify. You won't get to see the video, but you can certainly listen to it there as well. So we are expanding, we are growing. Zion is rising. So buckle in. Welcome to not just the fullness of the gospel, but the everlasting gospel as it comes here to the earth. For myself, I'm Shane Baldwin. For my guest, Latter-day Chad, and for all of you out there, we'll see you all next time.